Charlotte. She's a head of school at Bandek. You can see her writing at Bandek's podcast blog and hear her at the podcast. She attended actually Montessori through her elementary in California. And she has her Montessori training from Montessori Northwest and also Masters of Education from Loyola University. She has done very many Q&As for us already. She has also recorded 2 courses for us, Montessori Practice and Following the Child into the Future. And also she is one of the lecturers at Montessori Beginnings. One of her modules is there. So I'm really happy to have you on board. Yes, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I love doing these Q&As. Helping people do what they're most passionate about is just one of my greatest joys. And I love helping others and talking to people about Montessori and about child development and family life.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Well, since this is a Q&A, I will start with the questions. Samantha was asking about ways to grow great love between twins. And I think we can talk about siblings and the relationship between siblings. And I think it's a nice topic to start with. What do you think, Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. Sibling dynamics are huge. Many families have more than one child. And when you have more than one child, you want them to get along, for the lifelong relationship, as well as just not being miserable every day. It makes everybody's life hard when children are fighting. And so it's natural to compare children. As humans, we are meaning-making machines. We are looking for ways to attach what we know to what we are experiencing. And one of the ways we do that is through learning through that first child. What so-and-so did kind of becomes our model for how all children interact with the world. And it's natural to make comparisons. The older one had more one-on-one time with adults, and subsequent siblings have this wonderful model in their older siblings. So not only do they have, often two parent household, or if you have an intergenerational model, mostly adults interacting with a child. But once you have a sibling, no matter how many adults there are, that child becomes so much stronger of a model. So it's natural to have, language develop faster because they don't have as many people trying to figure out their cues. This younger child is trying to keep up with the older one, so they might be walking sooner. And so it's natural to compare. And that's when, as adults, it's important to activate our upstairs brains and even just notice that I'm making comparisons. Am I attaching meaning and trying to look for a pattern in order to support my child? Or am I actually, pushing a pain button to say, like, the first one maybe was a really easy sleeper. And so then the next child is maybe not such a good sleeper. Neither of those is good or bad. Neither of those is how it should be. But maybe if I'm having that expectation that, they're going to sleep through the night, right away, that's an unfair expectation. Or, am I starting this child off with negative scripting of remembering that first year just being miserable because nobody slept more than 45 minutes at a time? That means that second child can't surprise you and be like, oh, look, they are sleeping for more than 45 minutes. Are they starting out in a deficit? So that's not specific to twins, but I think it's universal for if you have more than one child. Don't feel guilty for finding yourself falling into those comparisons. that's just the human experience. We're looking for those patterns. We're looking for what's a rule and what's an anomaly. But just noticing you're doing that. Am I doing this because of something that's based on reality? Or am I doing this, based on assumptions or based on like a test set of one, if that makes sense. As far as twins, or when you have multiples, it's even more natural to make that comparison, because often they're hitting those milestones at similar points. The direct comparison is there not just for a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, but as 2 4-year-olds. And it's natural to get into a little bit of competition. And sometimes in order to like avoid competition, we kind of shift the pendulum to the other side. So maybe I grew up in a household where, you felt a lot of comparison, or if you really want there to not be that comparison, we overcompensate to when one sibling scores a goal. It's like, yeah, you scored a goal. You also played really hard, and in a non-emotional place, we can notice how, celebrating one person isn't actually saying anything negative about the other sibling. Those celebrations of achievements, we all have celebrations of achievements. We all have things that are unique and that we do very well. And celebrating what somebody does well is not saying, you ran so fast that you won the race. That's just factual. That's not a judgment about, so you're a better person. And so when, even though I can totally understand how the effort is there in praising one, needing to make that equal in terms of praise or celebration for another, rather than bringing another up, it's kind of diminishing the, achievement or that moment for celebration from the actual achievement. And it reinforces the idea that love and attention are pie or cake, and there's a finite amount. And if you get some, I don't get it. It kind of dilutes that experience of I did something wonderful and I'm being celebrated. So again, one of those times that you just notice what your natural instinct is and asking yourself, where did that come from? Noticing when those moments come up of that you see maybe some bickering happening, or this is a pain point, and asking, where did this come from? Where did this start from? Sometimes we can really make things so much bigger than they are. Of maybe some bickering is happening and we think like there's something bigger at play, and it's like, no, it's just time for an after school snack. It's not sibling rivalry. It's not, we've set up poor conditions. It's just, sometimes you're crabby at the person who's nearest to you, because they're going to love you no matter what. And so when those sibling dynamics start to emerge, it's also helpful to, as an adult, to not go in and mediate, because then we're sending the message that there are winners and losers, and I'm here to judge who was right in this situation. And often when children are, left to their own devices and adults don't jump in with their own assumptions and their own baggage about that type of a situation, children will come to a really peaceful resolution that isn't necessarily what I would have picked or I would have suggested, or maybe doesn't feel equitable to me, but it feels equitable for them. And as long as I don't put my own judgment about it, like the pink one is better, and so you need to share it. If they're playing with something and there's a pink one and a blue one, and there's, I want the pink one, no, I want it. And as an adult, I jump in and try and fix that. Then I've attached more baggage to, the pink block or whatever it was. But if I don't jump in, maybe they realize, oh yeah, no, you can have the pink one. I like the blue one. It matches my outfit. Whatever it is, when we bring our own baggage to something or our own assumptions or think that we need to mediate, often we're making more of a mess of things with very good intentions. But trust, this is one of those trust the child, listen and see how they're problem solving. And give yourself a pat on the back for all those times when they are voicing their opinions and being assertive and having some problem solving and conflict negotiation.
Emily in the chat is asking about supporting social play and skills and friendship development in a 4-year-old who is about to start in September schooling.
Okay, so social development is hugely important. Social success leads to academic success. I always chat with families about learning in an academic sense is a very courageous undertaking. It means I am actively seeking out an experience that I know I don't yet master, right? So I'm actively doing something that I know I can't do. And so that takes a lot of courage. And children can be more courageous when they know that they will make mistakes, but they cannot fail. And that happens when there's that social safety net in place. If that be, primary caregiver, if that be, a friend group, they're more daring when they know that, there's a whole group of people who are here to support them, and you're going to fall down, but there's people standing by with Band-Aids and a hug, right? And so we have often very good intentions in our play with children that can sometimes create problems down the road. So on the other side of multiple sibling dynamics, you can have an only child. And so questions about social dynamics often come up with only children, or when there's a large age gap between an oldest child and a sibling or siblings. And so I'm not assuming that that's what's going on, but it is something that naturally comes to mind. And so in that case, if I'm a primary caregiver and I'm caring for a child, if they say, come play with me, typically it really more means come watch me play. And if we're playing Legos together, then and I pick up a red Lego, I was going to use that. Great, no, go ahead. As primary caregiver, we would give them the clothes off our back and the food out of our mouth. Whatever they want is totally fine. And that's not how peer-to-peer play works. If I'm saying play with me, it means that I need to have some of the toys. I'm not just going to give you all of the toys just because you want them. And so a child has set up the conditions where when somebody is playing with them, they're not making the difference between when my primary caregiver plays with me, they give me whatever I want. And when a peer plays with me, I need to give them some, otherwise it's not playing together. So kind of naming that with a child to say, I'm playing with this one, if you're playing with the red Lego, I was going to use that. Okay, well, I want to use it now. And if you want to play together, then I need to have some, and you need to have some. Otherwise, you want to play alone and you want me to watch you play, which is fun for you, but that's not how I want to spend my time right now. So you get to decide, do you want me to play with you, which means I need to have some of the toys, or do you want to play alone and get all of the toys? So that's really value neutral. A child doesn't have to play with somebody else, but they get to decide what's going to be more important in this moment. Do I want to be with somebody else, or do I want to have all the stuff? And sometimes you want all the stuff. And sometimes it's, no, I want to compromise my own needs because this social development means more to me in this moment than having all of the item. And so modeling that when you're playing with a child, even though it goes against every instinct, is setting a child up for success because it's a more realistic model of what a child's going to see in a peer-to-peer play situation. Another piece is that sharing component. And so when a child is sharing, it's definitely one of those, like, we would give a child the food out of her mouth. And so if a child says, can I have X, Y, and Z, to sometimes model, thinking about it and actually, no, I'm enjoying all of this. Thanks for asking. Feel free to ask. This time I'm going to say no. If you want to share some of yours, you're more than welcome. I'm enjoying this smoothie, so I'm going to drink all of it. And sometimes, offering, sometimes not offering, sometimes saying yes when they ask, and sometimes not saying yes when they ask, really sets up the conditions that they feel safe setting a boundary and offering generously, not the expectation that if somebody else wants something, you have to give it to them. As well as, like setting up that model, because they're learning those models typically at home that then pave the way for success in that peer-to-peer interaction.
From Emily Rubin, she says, I'm especially curious to learn more about setting boundaries and inviting cooperation.
Yeah, boundaries are important. And in my part of the world, boundaries has been a huge topic for the last few years, especially as women, and especially as working women, talking about boundaries and that it's okay to set a boundary. And as many of us are learning this as adults, I'm learning that my feelings are valid and I get to, voice those. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. If I'm saying it with a sense of grace and dignity, and it's to protect myself, not to hurt you, then it's not my job to make you feel better about that. So we're changing the entire paradigm. And so much of us are drawn to Montessori because we want to make things better for those who are younger than us. So not having them have to learn this message at 37, they can learn it at 3 or at 7. And a lot of that starts with things that are not very comfortable for us as adults. So a child asking for something and having that question be a real question, hearing that as a real question is the basis for a boundary. So can I try your smoothie? And thinking, modeling, thinking about it and saying, I don't really want to share today. Or yeah, absolutely. Do you want your own straw? Or here's a spoon, to, set those limits of what's going to be comfortable for you. And even in the situation of like, even if you say, I want to drink this whole smoothie and you don't finish it, you don't owe it to anybody else. Like, that's yours and you get to choose, which is very uncomfortable for many of us. But if you think of, instead of that smoothie, if that smoothie is instead time. So let's say I have my personal time at the end of the day, and I wanted to go home and quilt, and I finished the project I was working on. I don't owe the rest of that personal time to my employer or to my husband or to any other person. That's still my time, and I can choose to give it or to spend it in different ways, but that's different from a sense of owing. And those two pieces are kind of value neutral, whether it's a smoothie and you get to choose where you spend your time and where you give your smoothie and what you keep for yourself. And if I keep it all for myself and I throw the whole thing away, that's totally fine. It's my smoothie. And the same thing is true of time, which translates into comfort with boundaries and saying no and listening to your body and what's going to feel good for me. Which means when I say yes to something, when I give somebody my time or my resources or my energy or whatever it is, it's genuine. And that person can trust me and and understand that when I give an answer of yes, I mean it. I mean that yes response, which is so valuable. That's so special when you know that you don't have to question what somebody said, that if they say yes, but there's, it's going to cost you later down the line, all of that is a lack of boundaries. And so figuring out how to model that with your child, in some ways it goes against evolution. Like evolution means that we are going to put all of our resources, all of our everything into the child who's in front of us. And so actively needing to do that because we're no longer in a threatening situation most of the time. So modeling that, and for many of us, it does ask us to reconsider, are we doing what our parents did, for better or worse? Are we doing something as the pendulum shift against what our parents did, or are we making a choice and being intentional about this parenting journey, or about the classroom, like our classroom dynamic. So setting boundaries can also happen in terms of, I don't remember the precise nomenclature that you used for the other half of that, but the other half of setting boundaries is about consequences, right? So if I set a boundary, I'm also choosing to have the consequences that go along with that boundary. So for a child getting to choose, you can choose, it's time for bed. You can choose to get ready now. And we have time to cuddle and read 3 books. If I have to ask you multiple times, you are also choosing to not cuddle and not read 3 books. Like, you can choose not to cooperate. I can't make a child do anything. I can't make a child go to sleep. I can't make a child respect that boundary. But I can follow through, and that's what we call a boundary. So if I say it's time for bed, I'm putting a boundary on ending this day's activity, if that's playing together or utilizing technology or whatever it is, like that transition, that change of venue is setting a boundary to this time. We're not doing whatever we want for as long as we want. A boundary has been set. And when a child chooses to buy into that, they're choosing to have whatever positive is coming after that, of being the one to decide who tucks them in, being the one to pick which books they want to read, deciding if there's bubbles in the bath or not. And if they choose not to, they're also choosing that, we're skipping all the good stuff. It's still time to go to bed. I'm still enforcing this boundary. But we're not going to do all of that other stuff that makes bedtime such a fun and special time. And again, one of the hardest things is following through there and having that moment where this is uncomfortable. Everything is telling me to not continue to do this, to make it right, or to try and take care of all the tears. But to say, what message am I sending, and is that the message I want to be sending? Is this life-giving? Is this supportive for my child's development?
Jeannie was asking in the chat if you are talking about natural consequences.
Yeah. So natural consequences are the counterpart to logical consequences. So natural consequences have to do with the natural world. So like, if I drop my pen, it always falls to the ground. The end. It never floats up in the air. That's a natural consequence. A natural consequence, if I don't carry my coffee carefully, it's going to spill all over me. That's a natural consequence. And then there's also logical consequences, which have to do with, relationships. Like, if I am unkind, I will not have friends. That's a logical consequence. If I choose not to cooperate with, it's bedtime, then I don't get to pick who puts me to bed. We don't get to have the whole routine. I get carried to bed instead of, getting to walk on my own feet. Those are logical consequences, which are really different from punishments. If you have to make up a consequence, it's typically a punishment. If you just have to take some deep breaths and access your upstairs brain instead of responding emotionally, it's more likely that it's a consequence of what's going to happen as a result of my choices or my child's choices that make the results be the teacher instead of me being the bad guy. So like, it's time to go to bed. Do you want to walk by yourself, or would you prefer to be carried? If they're not making that choice, the consequence is I'm going to choose for you. I'm going to carry you. So having that experience educate, and then it just cycles back on itself, that you mean what you say, you're a safe person. And when that is not always like a moving goal line, then children have a greater sense of success and security, and they know that when they say something, I don't want to be touched right now, I'd like to play alone, whatever the case may be, they know that there's a greater likelihood that that's going to be respected on their end as well.
Thank you. Another question that I have here is about experience working with bilingual Montessori homes.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any experience, and if so, what recommendations do you have?
Yeah.
I would
So
also
go ahead.
add a question, like if we want to give the child another language, how can we do that?
Yeah. So I have family who are multilingual, and I lived in Germany. I'm grew up in California. I'm American, but I lived in Germany at an international and taught in an international school. So I actually have a lot of experience with multilingual settings. It's helpful for brain development if a child can put those language into some kind of container. So if that is like, if you're living in if your family is German and you're living in France, that you have home language and school language, that when you are out and about, you use the language of your host country, and when you are at home, you speak your native language. This is especially helpful if you are if your child is a third country kid, so you have typically mommy language and daddy language, or whatever your family dynamic looks like. You have one parent and the other parent, and then you're in a third country to speak that language when you are out and about, so that a child has that as their play language. And then in all interactions with the parent, they're speaking in whatever language is native to that parent or primary caregiver. Can also apply if let's say family speaks one language, but you have like an au pair or an elder, somebody else in your child's life who speaks another language. When they're talking to the child, that's the only language they speak. It's not to say that bad things are going to happen if you don't follow that rule. It's that a child can have greater success when there's consistency. And that is true for anything, especially very young children, but only more so when there is, multiple languages happening. So if there's some kind of container that you can utilize, so like school language and home language, single parent, and that as much as possible that those are built up in parallel. So if you have each parent or primary caregiver can do everything in that language. So their cooking in that, speaking in that language when they're cooking together, and maybe making traditional recipes from, whatever culture you come from, reading books together and having, as much as possible, equal number of books so that there isn't like an emotional preference toward one language or another. That's hugely helpful. This doesn't need to be as necessary when you're home language and you're living somewhere else, because play language will develop on its own. And if a child's going to school in a different language than they're speaking at home, it's not as necessary to have, like if we're speaking Spanish at home and you're going to school in an English speaking culture, if most, if not all of your books at home are in Spanish, that's totally fine. They're going to have plenty to read, at school, public libraries, with friends, all of that good stuff. But they will start to, at some point, they're going to realize that people are speaking differently, and they might start to translate nomenclature depending on like syntax, or if you speak a language where inflection matters, that might or might not grow completely in parallel. And that's all very, very typical. For anybody who's in the US, if you are in a household that is, multilingual, often children will qualify for speech services that are paid through, like publicly paid speech services, which is a really great resource if you're in the US. And like anecdotally, my personal experience is the greater desire a child has to communicate, and the more, some children are just very content. If you understand me, great. If you don't understand me, great. They're very content within their own selves. Versus you have children who, want to communicate and want to know the names of things and want to be interacting a lot with a person. Those children tend to acquire languages more quickly, speaking both or multiple languages in parallel more quickly than a child who, is just a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more, if you change my diaper, great. Otherwise, I'll just be here hanging out. They're just kind of more along for the ride. They might prefer one language. And that's also, it's not to say that if they don't start speaking in both languages by 18 months, they'll never acquire this language, or something is wrong. Or if we're starting to see words between like 1.5 and 2, and you have children growing up in a multilingual household and they're not coming up with words, it doesn't mean anything's wrong. Like you wouldn't think that if this was a child who was only working on one language, but we bring so much more energy to it when there's multiple languages at play. And so don't worry about it. Just keep the language experience coming, even if a child responds to you in not the language that you speak to them, because they might be young enough that they're not realizing that there's a difference. If they understand what I say in English and they respond in Spanish, if both sides of that are understood, they might not be making the differentiation between those two experiences. And that's not something to worry about. Just always responding back to a child in whatever your pre-decided on experiences. If it's, whenever I'm interacting with this child, I'm speaking Spanish. If they respond to me in English, just respond to them again in Spanish. So that always that exposure is happening. And then, that development is happening even when it doesn't look like it is.
There are 2 questions in the chat regarding this. Follow-up question on bilingual home from Christina.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I live in Mexico, and our native language is Spanish, but we want our baby to learn English. How can we implement this? And another question, sorry, I will tell you from Claire. Thank you for those tips. I speak French to our child and my husband speaks in Dutch to him, but my husband and I speak in English together, so he hears that too. Should we actively teach him English or just let him hear that? I worry he may feel excluded by this.
Um, both totally awesome questions. Children have a seemingly infinite capacity for language until age 6, and there are some languages that are, if your ear gets fixed and your tongue gets fixed, and so French is a great example that because I didn't hear French sounds and practice French sounds before age 6. I can work really, really hard and it's not going to develop with the same level of fluency as if you hear those sounds in your first 6 years. A lot of Asian languages are like this. A lot of languages indigenous to the African continent are like this. And so just hearing it, and children babble in different languages. There's so much research about linguistics and children and infants. It's really fascinating. And so the first piece, if you're trying to introduce a language that's not native to a child's primary caregivers and not in the country that you're in, then I'd probably focus on like some kind of container that you can put that in. Maybe there is, if you are in an area of the world where like there's American groups or English speaking play groups. If you're in an international community, there often are like if there's an international school, or if there is military base or military presence, it's sometimes needing to use all of your resources, but looking for areas where there are English speaking play groups or whatever language you're looking to add. And that would be a container that, when we go to this play group, we speak this language. Maybe you make a friend with some of those first language English. And whenever you play with that friend, you use English, and your child might respond to, that friend or in that play group in their first language, but they're being exposed to this, and language just takes a while. This is true even if you're working on one language. Children babble and have their own language for something, and we work on understanding them, looking for meaning and looking for patterns, but having that exposure is hugely important for gaining experience. If when you're speaking to so what I'm hearing is maybe like a third culture experience. So if you're speaking one language, if you have mommy language and daddy language, and then there's another language at play, if you're speaking it to each other, a child won't feel left out unless you intentionally try to use it to have secrets. There's so much about like raising children and family dynamics that it doesn't even cross a child's mind until we bring it to the equation. So if we only use that language when we're whispering and we send the message that they're being left out, yeah, they're going to feel left out no matter what. But if it's just happening around them, they're not going to feel left out. It's not the same as adults. If we were to go to a party and everyone else spoke a language and I'm the only one who doesn't, and nobody makes an effort to communicate with me, yeah, I'm going to feel left out. But children are hardwired at this young age to acquire as much language as quickly as possible. So when you're talking to them, when you're talking around them, everything, they're just trying to soak it all in. And so it's not that they will understand you when you're speaking the language that you speak to them. Anybody who has children who are already talking probably has experienced if you say a word that you wish you didn't use very much. In English, we call them 4-letter words. If you say that, you don't say it to a child, they might repeat it back to you. Those words we use when someone cuts us off in traffic. you don't have to say it to a child for them to pick up on it and to use it appropriately. And so you don't have to worry about them feeling left out, especially because that's just your family dynamic of, this is the language we speak to each other, and this is the language we speak to you, and everybody is understood, and there's no secrets. There's no secrets within our family.
Question from Lisa. How to deal with toddler frustration with tasks leading to meltdowns, and then offering help. Toddler meltdown worsens at times, and other times toddler doesn't want to try and only have mommy or daddy do it. Putting on pants, shoes, etc.
Yeah, that's a big one. So when I hear toddler, I'm making assumptions, but we're talking about a child like 2 or younger. But I know that's not everybody's assumption. So whoever asked that question, if you have more information or would like me to modify this response, just pop it in the chat. But frustration is very natural. Frustration is what happens when you are aware of your current limitations, right? I know what I want and I know I can't get there. Like, that's when frustration happens. And frustration, especially for our youngest children, is because everything's always a work in progress. So you notice those just explosive short temper right before a child, levels up in terms of speech, because they know what they want to say and they know you don't understand them. So I kind of think of meltdowns as being like biologically related. So like if I'm hungry or I'm tired or too much has been asked of me, like meltdown is I need my physical needs to be met. And like a tantrum as being like more of a communication strategy. I didn't get what I want, and so I'm going to have a tantrum, and it can turn into a meltdown. But I think of those as kind of two different things. So not being able to do something that you want to do in like I want to run into the busy street and I'm not allowed to do that, but more in like I want to put my own shoe on, and the first time I try it, I can't, and I get frustrated by that. Like, those are two very different experiences. And so if a child is showing frustration about something like a skill that they want to do, not being understood, trying to do something and just, getting really frustrated when they can't do it the first time, standing by and providing as little help as possible, but as much as necessary. So sitting on the floor with them, especially for youngest children, show, don't tell. So maybe, bunch their pant up so that you can see that little hole that happens when the foot end and the, hip end meet, and, pointing to that and kind of putting it on just their foot, and then pull, like giving little pieces of encouragement without saying, put your foot through the leg of the pant, because they're trying to acquire language. So they're either trying to process the language or trying to do what you're telling them to do, but not both. So giving encouragement and little coaching moments, and then affirmation when they did it, even if you helped with the pants like 95%, and then they pulled the last little bit. If they look at you and they're delighted, look, you did it, it's more about, it's like, okay, so there's self-efficacy. Whatever you think, you're right. So if I think I can put on my pants, absolutely I can. If I think I can't put on my pants, I could put on 100 pairs of pants and I'm still going to have that image of myself as like, I can't put on my pants. And so providing that encouragement paves the way for building that self-efficacy. So providing a little bit of support, observing where the frustration is, and seeing if that difficulty can be removed. So maybe you're asking your child to put on their pants standing up, because that's how I put my pants on, is standing up as an adult. Have them sit on the floor, or maybe maybe the shoes are too small, or in the US right now, the shoes that have like a zip around them are pretty popular, but they're kind of tough to wrangle a little foot into. And so like seeing if there's like a physical limitation or something that's really fixable, because you can't really fix the emotions other than being there and supporting those emotions, but you can fix the conditions around those emotions for a child to be more successful.
Wafa Gama is asking, I have a 5-year-old in my classroom who does hit and pinch his peers with no reason. I tried to talk to him and explain that how to be kind and nice with friends, but it didn't work. If there are any other actions that I can use to overcome this problem, can you share them, please?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. It's kind of one of those boundaries pieces. Like, people will treat me the way I allow them to treat me. And so if I send the message that I do not like that, I do not allow anybody to hurt my body, like, I don't want to play with you, then typically that behavior will stop. Often, historically, it's been the case to kind of offset that with like, oh, do you want to play with them? Oh, are you looking for a friend, and kind of excusing the behavior in that way. And rather, setting the limit of like, if you want to interact with people, this is not the way to do it. And that if children feel like they have permission to like set a boundary and say, I don't like how you're treating me. Like, if I'm in a classroom setting and somebody's being unkind, I might say, I can't make you be nice. And especially a 5-year-old can understand this. I can't make you be nice. But I can say that if you are unkind to people, and pinching is an unkind behavior, if you are unkind to people, people won't want to play with you. And I won't make them, because I won't make somebody stand there and get hurt. And that message tends to start to hit home at some point. It's important to keep a close eye on that if that's an approach you decide to take, because children are smart, and you do not want this to unravel to the point where children have figured out that so-and-so is bad. If so-and-so is pinching people, like, we don't have to play with so-and-so, but you don't want that to be, we don't play with so-and-so because they pinch, or, whatever the case may be. Because in that situation, why would I do the right thing if people are going to remind me of all of my worst moments? If I'm never going to have a clean slate and get to try again, well, yeah, if you're going to think I pinch you and I'm not going to get a free pass when I don't pinch you, yeah, I'm going to keep pinching you because you're going to believe that of me anyway. And so that's where it's a lot of hustle with adults, and making sure that we're paying attention and not like negative scripting that child, or that there's not kind of that bullying happening toward that child of, we don't want to play with so-and-so because they hit. And another piece that's kind of difficult, and it depends on your relationship with that child's family and primary caregivers, is often children are kind of set up for failure because of how they play at home. So if at home, like pinching is happening in a playful way, or if wrestling is happening in a playful way, if a 4-year-old runs full force into their parent or caregiver, they're not going to hurt that person, and they're going to get, a very fun physical response. So in that way, running full force at somebody is an act of love. But if they run full force at their peer, they're going to knock them over. And it's not fair as adults for us to say, oh, they're just trying to get you to play with them. So asking a family, like, we've noticed so-and-so doing this at home, like, they obviously want to interact with the other children. We're noticing so-and-so doing this at school. They obviously want to interact with people. Are they doing this at home, or, have you noticed this at home? Because sometimes what is starting off as very innocuous or play or an expression of love, then when it's toward a peer, now it's aggressive. And so helping families to realize that if they run full force at their adult and the response is a big hug and a tackle and a cuddle and tickles, what's the intention behind it? Even if they didn't hurt their parent, setting them up for success of, asking, do you want to tickle? Or, can we wrestle? So starting that with some kind of container that helps children have parameters, have boundaries around those behaviors, so they can still engage in that, but in a way that sets them up for success with peer-to-peer interactions.
Thank you. I have a very similar question, but from the other point of view.
Yeah.
The question is from Adriana, and she writes, I'm not sure if my question is in line with the theme of this session, but latest, I'm thinking how to help my preschool child to avoid bullying or react in a situation when another child wants to harm him verbally or physically.
Oof, that's really hard. And this is mildly different if we're talking about in a theoretical sense versus like the triage of like, this is actively happening to my child right now. So as just a baseline, if a child has a strong sense of self and a feeling that they are somebody worthy of respect, and that they get to dictate the terms by which somebody else engages with them, they will not allow that behavior. And it doesn't have to be, like bigger, littler, older, younger, or anything. I don't let people treat me like that, and giving them the skills to walk away. That can start even at home with like an outburst, or a young child feeling a lot of frustration and hitting their parent, which is a natural thing that happens when you're tired and you're frustrated. But to set that boundary with, kindness, but firm and consistent. I don't let anybody hit me. I will not let you hit me. I'm here when you're ready. Whatever feels comfortable for you. But when you set that model with a child, it starts the piece of language of, I'm happy to talk with you about this. I do not like being yelled at. I can't hear you when you're yelling at me. Let me know when you're ready to talk, or we can have a cuddle until you're ready to use your word. Whatever is developmentally appropriate for your child and is comfortable for you. So modeling those experiences of I get to dictate those terms. Another one that's really important is making sure that children understand that they have body autonomy. And so not putting our own our own thought on top of that. So um, not requiring um, that they hug a family member who maybe essentially is a stranger to them, or they don't want to hug, to say, like, I don't want to hug, and give them nomenclature for that. Um, because if you feel like you have permission with, at home and with your safest people, um, then then you feel like you can take that out into the world at large. But if your primary caregivers are saying, no, like, that's grandma, just go give grandma a kiss, or let grandma kiss you, you're undermining that sense of body autonomy, which can lead to questioning that internal sense, um, and feeling like you just need to stand there and get pinched, or whatever the case may be, and helping a child to feel like they have resources when they don't like those interactions. So like, if a child's playing on a playground and there's a child there who is not being very kind, or you don't like the type of language they're using, um, maybe not going into that interaction, not necessarily jumping in and fixing it, but observing it and seeing, how's my child responding to it? Is my child very comfortably just moving away from this child, and they're not bothered nearly as much as I am? They're on the slide and this other child comes, great, I'm going to just go do the swings, and it doesn't even faze them. I would definitely bring my own emotions to that interaction. But if it is, starting to bother your child, going and getting them and saying, let's go do something different, and talking with them about how they felt in that situation. It seems like maybe you're kind of uncomfortable, or I noticed that there was somebody who wasn't really using kind words. Did you notice that? And maybe they say yes, and maybe they say no. But giving yourself permission to leave. We don't have to stay here and have negative experiences. And just kind of casually talking about, if that ever happens at school, you don't have to be around people like that. Who is somebody who makes you feel good? It feels good to be around people who make us feel good. And that's called a friend. And somebody who doesn't make you feel very good, that's not a friend. So modeling that, practicing it, and giving those skills outside of when it's needed are really great in theory. Although that doesn't really address, like, if this is currently happening, if your child is currently in danger. And that's a lot more specific. So if that's the case, or if that doesn't really answer your question, just please send me an email, and I'm happy to help.
Another question from Sarah. What is the biggest mistake that parents make?
Oof, the biggest mistake that parents make, I would say, is not trusting their gut. We have the gift and the burden of being in a time when there are 1,000 answers literally at your fingertips, or you can ask Alexa or Siri any question, and you're going to get 100 different answers, and they don't always match. They don't always align with your unique situation. They don't align with, your belief or your understanding. And that's really hard. And we all want to do what is best for our child or the children who we're responsible for. And we think that if we get enough information, that we will be able to get the answer right and not make any mistakes. And that's just not true. So, getting the information from sources who you trust, if that be people who you know personally, whose judgment you trust, or online, or some other kind of like media resource that aligns with your experience, and that you've had a good track record of learning more about this and implementing these strategies, and yeah, this works for us, and I feel confident in the recommendations this person or this resource is providing. And to then move forward with that goal, with that action plan in mind, and not question yourself. Because it feels like every step of the way, it feels like the decision that we need to make today is the most important decision ever in the history of the world. So like, picking your OBGYN or picking your stroller, like feels like the biggest decision ever. It's one decision, and nothing is going to make or break your child's development. So having confidence in that and giving yourself permission to say, like, we made the best decision we had with the information we had. We made the best decision we could with the information we had at the time. If I knew then what I know now, would I make the same decision? Probably not. If I knew then what I knew then, would I make the same decision? Probably. And really walking that tightrope of staying the course long enough that you give something time to get past that point of uncomfortable, but also not, just slamming your head against a wall of like, nope, but we made this decision, we have to stick with it. Being gentle with yourself, I think, especially with the more information that's available and the more mindfulness we bring to the act of parenting, no matter what your relationship is to this child, the more information we have, and the more we want to do right by this child, we increase the stakes on ourselves, and we kind of erode our self-confidence, and saying that parenting can feel very lonely, but you are not alone. You are not the first parent to be up all night with a crying baby. You are not going to be the last. Whatever decision or roadblock you're in right now, there's been thousands, if not millions, of parents who have been there before. And everyone just did the best they could, even things that now we cringe about. And so trusting your gut, seeking advice and seeking help, while still like do what aligns with your own belief and how you want to live your life as a family. Because more than anything, children are always looking to their parents and their primary caregivers for how should I feel about this situation? And it can be a crap situation, but if their primary caregiver is saying, well, this is an exciting adventure that we didn't expect, they're going to handle it a lot better than if it's a 95% good situation and their primary caregiver is panicking because it's not 100% what they expected. And so doing the best you can with the skills and information you have at the time, and then telling yourself that that's enough. Like that's absolutely plenty.
Thank you. Currently 30 weeks pregnant with my first baby. I really love the Montessori method and would love to raise my children this way. My husband and I are on the same page, but how do we get the other caregivers, grandparents, aunts on board? This method is very different from what friends and family do. We want them to respect the methodology we choose without them getting defensive or judgmental about doing things differently.
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's hard to do something differently. And more important than respecting the methodology is them respecting you, right? This is what you are choosing for your child. That's not about Montessori. Like that's about you are the parents and you get to choose what you want to do. If you were choosing to follow halal or kosher dietary practices with your child, no one would choose to, undermine that, or that would be absolutely unconscionable if they were to go against that. And we seem to think less of ourselves, or seem to think it holds less water if it's not that dramatic of a situation, but you are the parent and you get to decide. And it's uncomfortable, but kindly and gently explaining, this is what we've decided to do. We won't be getting a crib. Thank you for the offer. If you'd like to make a contribution, this is the floor bed that we want to choose, or whatever that looks like for your family. It doesn't have to be rude or like breaking the relationship, but there is a reason you want to do whatever it is you want to do. And if they want to be a part of your child's life in a meaningful way, this is what they're also going to do. And to figure out, it's fantastic that you and your partner are on the same page, because that's more than anything. My partner and I, like if it's something going on with his family, he's going to be the one to primarily communicate. And if it's something going on with my family, I'm the one who's primarily going to communicate. And so you two being on the same page is more meaningful for anybody, because there's a very different dynamic of like son-in-law or daughter-in-law versus, your own child. Of course, you want to do right by your own child. And that's exactly what you want in this situation, is you are doing right by your child. These are the reasons you want to implement this. If you would like to give a gift, these, I'd be happy to put together an Amazon list for you. Thank you for wanting to celebrate the birth of our child. We're excited about it too. These are the things on our list, whatever it is, to, create the conditions under which they can interact and be engaged, so that it's not, you can't do anything. And remind yourself that this is human development. This is not like, well, it's the Montessori way to do something. I mean, we call it Montessori, but it's based in logic and it's based in science. It's human development. And so you're saying, I want to raise my child in a way that I believe is supportive of human development. And I don't think anybody can really disagree with that. If they ask for an explanation, or it feels better to give an explanation of why we're not going to have light up toys, or why we prefer to have fewer things, or whatever is the pain point for your family, if it helps to have an explanation, look at some resources. I know Montessori Baby and Montessori Toddler are just really phenomenal, because you got to get them on board in those early days. It's hard for elders to understand, why aren't you putting them in a crib? And having those, that language, those phrases to use can be super helpful. But having that courage of, this is how we're choosing to raise our child. You can call it Montessori, you can call it gentle parenting, you can call it whatever you want, but this is your choice. And you don't really have to convince them to get on board. You just have to say, like, I say just, but like, it's not your responsibility to convince them the earth is round. It's your responsibility to say, this is what we believe in this family. And I hope you choose to celebrate with us in this way, because we feel like it's the most supportive to our child's health and well-being. And I know you want that for a child. I know you want them to have a healthy, rich life.
Thank you. Another question is about screen time. From Susan. My toddler parents let their children use iPods in the car and other places to keep them busy, also at home. What is your advice in terms of screen time?
Yeah, so it's easier and nicer if there is a kind of black and white answer, isn't there? That all screen time is bad or all screen time is totally fine. It's a lot more nuanced in my experience of like, sometimes there are times when this is totally appropriate and sometimes there aren't. And so is it, playing a game, kind of more of like, what's the content? Not all books are great, but they're a lot more palatable um, than screen time. But it's again about the content rather than like um, really the item itself. And so figuring out if there are ways to implement this with your family in a way that feels natural to you. I think it absolutely has space, especially as children start to be curious about big things and ask big questions. Often you can find better and more accurate answers on a using technology than in a in a book. It's a lot better to see a video of a whale than see a picture of a whale. So it's not to say it's always good or it's always bad. But it's when it's something that's uncomfortable for you or it doesn't align with what your goals for your children, or you don't like the behavior that comes after it. And that's true if it's screen time or a certain type of play or a play group that your children attend, whatever it is. If you don't like the message that's being sent, or if you don't like what happens as a result of that, or the consequences of that interaction, then for me that's kind of a red flag.
Fabiola is asking in the chat, I understand that with the Montessori method, kids explore openly any topic, but how to encourage them to finish the activity they started and not to jump to another activity without completing it? Do you have to help them and interrupt them, or do you have just to observe?
I think that definitely depends on the age of the child and kind of what kind of activity it is. Sometimes in a home type setting, there might be certain things that we leave up all the time. And so like if you have a train track, maybe it's something that you leave up all the time or for a significant period of time until you realize that a child's not really being drawn to that, and then we're going to put it away for something else. Or if you have like a Lego table and you don't put away the Lego table every time. So it kind of depends on what it is, if they're just bouncing from one activity to another, or if they're engaging with them appropriately, to really bring up, are you done with this? Because if you're done with this, it's totally okay to put it away. Because sometimes there can be this emotional piece of like judgment about if you're done with this or not. So like, are you done with this becomes not a value neutral question, but rather a like, are you sure you're done with this? Don't you want to keep, doing X, Y, and Z? And if they want to be done with something, great, that's okay, that's fine. If you're done, it's time to put it away. And if you're not done, then, keep working on it. Or what's making you not want to put it away if there's pushback in that situation. So yeah, there is exploring any topic, but there is also that balance of there needs to be some level of completion, whether that's I've decided I'm done playing with Legos, or the time is done, or whatever context in which that's going to be finished.
Thanks. I will try to choose last maybe 2 questions.
Yeah.
Miss Ika, she is sharing the same question with Fabiola, so I will share it again since you just finished the question. I have a related question to Fabiola. I have 19-month-old toddler. He really likes to play with Montessori toys, like puzzle shapes, pouring rainbow rice, and so on. But from one activity to the next activity, he leaves that and not tidy up the activity. How to encourage the child to tidy up and being responsible?
First, 19 months is still really little. And so be gentle with yourself, be gentle with them. They're still kind of in that lizard brain, being drawn to this and then being drawn to that, kind of like If you've read the book, if you give a mouse a cookie, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want some milk. And then, and it can kind of unravel like that. They were working on pouring, but then they made a spill. So they go to clean it up. And then they realize they have to use the toilet, so it kind of unravels in that way. If you're with them, you can kind of, guide them back or keep their attention on that. If, are you done here? And help them to put it away. Limiting how many items you have out at any one time is huge, because if they have, 5 activities available to them, that's going to be there's not going to be as many distractions versus if you have 15 things out, it's just going to unravel. And also modeling, like I always give the example that I knit, and when I'm done knitting, often I'll put it in my bag and put it down next to my chair. Like, yeah, that's kind of its place now. Is it put away? No. And especially if I had a child at home, that would not be putting it away. And so we all do this. We do this, if you're reading or if you're looking at a tablet or whatever it is, you put it down where you're using it rather than putting it away. And so modeling, putting something away when you're done utilizing it, which is hard, and we have to retrain ourselves. But if I don't clean up after myself, it is completely unreasonable for a child to clean up after themselves. And we give ourselves a lot of free passes of all the times we don't clean up after ourselves. Then just having more mindfulness about what's available to them.
I want to know, how can I react to my child's behavior without yelling or punishing? How do I work with myself?
Oh, that's such a big question. First, good on you for noticing and for wanting to do something different, for acknowledging that doesn't feel good. Also, sometimes you might yell. You are a human, and sometimes there's emotional responses, and that doesn't make you a bad person. Even noticing that, this isn't how I want to interact with my child. I'm not parenting in the way I want to, especially when it's parent to child, rather than like if I'm in a classroom setting, like there's not that same emotional piece, and it's more of my responsibility to keep things professional. Yelling isn't professional. But in a home setting, there's going to be times when, you're just at your wit's end and you don't always respond perfectly. And to be gentle with yourself and mindful, figuring out those boundaries and those self-care strategies that are going to be life-giving. If that means not having a from scratch home cooked meal every night, that sometimes we eat something out of a package, or sometimes a child doesn't help, because if I have a child help and everything is always from scratch, I have no energy left to be my best self with my child. It's not about the things so much as the relationship and the interaction. So figuring out what tools are going to speak to you. How does it sit in your body when you're feeling frustrated or burnt out? When do you like make those connections of like, what kind of day have you had that means that, that results in yelling? Is it when you didn't have your afternoon coffee, make afternoon coffee a priority, or, when you ended your day with a meeting instead of with responding to emails. Okay, so what can you modify in those collections so that you can have more of your energy to be your best self with your child? And so, we're meaning making machines. So looking for those patterns when like, oh, I really had nothing left to give to my child at the end of the day. Versus, today was pretty good. I am in a class currently, and one of the greatest tools I had was like doing what you can during the workday. And this is true whether you are gainfully unemployed as primary caregiver, if you are working in an office, no matter what, to end your day with more energy. So if we start our day with 100% of our energy, and in the first hour, you use 10% of your energy. If you use that throughout the day, you're going home with 40% of, you're going home with 40% of your energy, right? And not the best 40% given to your whole world, your whole reason for existing, and they get the worst 40% of your day. But if you can carve out little moments to fill your cup back up, so after 10 minutes, taking a quick break and drinking water intentionally, not like drinking water while answering another email, or taking a walk around the building to go get coffee from the staff room on the other side of the building. So you're stretching your legs, maybe seeing a friend. If it's possible where you live, eating lunch outside, like whatever that is, that's just going to give you an extra 2% throughout the day, so that over the course of the day, instead of 10% completely throughout the day, maybe you go home with like 30% more energy because you've built yourself back up. If that's can you make this a face-to-face meeting instead of a Zoom meeting, if that's possible, and if you find that to be more receptive? Can you decide to put boundaries on, like, I don't answer emails from my phone, I only answer emails during my work day, whatever's possible. And sometimes we don't even know what's possible until we start to have that conversation, and we make these assumptions that this is what has to happen, but it doesn't. There's a lot of choices in there. But I loved that, of finding the little moments during the day when you can top yourself back up. One of mine was I got sugar-free hot chocolate. And during the day, I just make myself some sugar-free hot chocolate, or I got a carton of half and half and brought it to school, so that when I have my just regular school coffee, I get to have it with a little bit of half and half. And those little things during the day kind of brighten those moments, so that by the end of the day, I have a little bit more to give to my husband, and back to myself, so I'm not just completely burnt out. And like I said, whether you work in an office setting for pay or you're at home, finding those little bright moments during the day, so we're not just holding our breath until we get home and then having meltdown, and not being able to do anything productive.
Thank you. One last question. Is it
Hey.
okay for you?
Yeah, I can do one more.
One last question comes from the registration forms from Austin. Can you give us a few examples of how you enable a young child to be independent at home?
Oh, yeah. So I would say to start that with, and I will cage this with, like, even though this is the last question, my email is always open, charlotte@bondec.org. So if I didn't get to your question, or if something comes up later, just shoot me a note. Independence, more than any like item or any activity, starts with choices. So asking a child's opinion and giving choices whenever possible and whenever safe. If you always eat hot cereal for breakfast, do you want oatmeal or cream of wheat? Whatever it's going to be. Do you want to wear this coat or this one? Do you want to put on your t-shirt, or do you want help? Whatever it is, it's a mindset. It's a mindset of believing that this child is capable of playing an active role in their life. And once you start to unpack that, and like start to look for, okay, how can I make this an option for my child of choices, or that they get to share their opinion, those tend to like start to unravel, and more choices start to present themselves. And then it gets to the point where you're not only presenting choices, a child is taking initiative. So like, you present the choice of, do you want to put your shoes on or should I? Then it gets to, they always pick putting on their own shoes. And then it gets to the point where it's time for school. Do you want to put your shoes on? You already have your shoes on. So it's fostering independence by first you extending the choice, which then means the child starts to see themselves as capable. And that's the key that unlocks the door to independence.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone for coming. I will end the Zoom now because if I don't, we will be here for another 2 hours at least.
Yeah.
I have a list of another, I don't know, 80 questions. So it would take us a very long time to answer all. So thanks to everyone.